you folks have questions for me?
Yeah. You usually think of epic fantasy as having a medieval setting. Can you write an epic in modern or not?
I would say yes, even though I get a lot of pushback from my editor about this. In fact, in my books you have like different societies, and some people are fairly medieval, but most of the book takes place in the people that work within the magic system. It's a hard fantasy, so the magic system is very important, and they, just by having actual magic, can't be medieval. But you do get pushback, or I do, from my publisher that no, this needs to feel more medieval. This is epic fantasy. Make it more, et cetera, et cetera. I think you can break that, but I think you're fighting you're swimming upstream, basically.
Yep.
This is more of a comment or an invitation for you guys to reflect back on it than a question. The reading public seems to be more primed for fantasy now than it has been for a long time. The Lord of the Rings, the Harry Potter series, movies and books ending. There actually seems to be more of a hunger for fantasy. Whether you want to call it sword and sorcery or call it epic fantasy, people with swords running around killing other people who have swords as well. Is this more of a publisher perception that you guys are seeing as opposed to the consumers who are looking for the big Chihuahua killers, who are looking for the books with the great art on it and want to read and get immersed in a fantasy novel? Is this something that's publisher driven, or are you saying there's a trend in the consumers who aren't buying it?
It's actually, I'm going to take it and then,
yeah,
but it's, as I said before, it's really, it's merchant driven. The drive against big fat fantasies began when the bricks and mortars started realizing that
Barnes and Noble orders.
Yes.
Particularly Barnes and Noble.
Right. That instead of having this and having two of them on a shelf and taking up David Drake's space with these two, if you wrote at 120,000 instead of 108, I'm just making...
No. But that's always been the case. With paperback, the same thing. Paperback slots, where you have paperbacks at every drugstore, every grocery store. You have a fixed number of pockets, slots. And can you put 2 books in that slot if it's Shogun? Or can you put 6 if it's something else? And the merchant is going to make more money on 6 of something else than he will on 2 Shoguns.
Right, and the other side of that was that booksellers kind of reached a point where they were saying, we've reached a point in the price point, the cover price, that we can't go above. $27.95 seems to be the most people are willing to pay for a hardcover. And with production costs going up, but that ceiling remaining where it was, what had to give was the size of the book. And so what you had was $27.95 not buying as much today as it did 15 years ago. So it was the publishers responding to the merchants and the authors kind of having to adjust. Yeah.
Same as with Hershey bars.
Yeah, I actually left my novel in the back of my car and it melted all over the
Yeah, so given that, I mean, what do you see as the impact of a new distribution mechanism such as e-publishing, where the size is virtual, having on the genre?
Yeah. I don't think anyone. I think that's the bit. I think that's the $1 million question. You know the answer to
Let's
that.
hope one of you might know the answer.
Yeah, right.
It might be right as a chance to release what they consider the director's cut of their book, so they can put back all the stuff that the publisher made.
That's a fascinating issue.
Yeah, right.
We're going to end up with a lot of bloated books, but I think there's also going to be a lot of interesting stuff that, Yep.
Yeah. I wanted to know what you guys thought of the term manor punk, since it is kind of related to the epic tradition.
Manor punk.
Oh.
Is that M-A-N-O-R?
No, as in manners. As in, instead of it being more magic and swords, it's more social battles and court intrigue.
I am unfamiliar with the term.
Oddly enough, I did have somebody with a more academic background than I in an interview asked me, since the new fantasy series is set in something that isn't quite Rome, but there there's a lot of focus on, you know, between the relations between classes and such like. Do you consider yourself to have written a novel of manners? No. I mean, I read all of Jane Austen when I was in Cambodia, you know, as for the contrast. But I'm not kidding. No.
Okay, we have lots of questions. One and one and one and one. So you first.
And you want that? He choreographs, so you have to
Yeah.
dance.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was wondering, do you feel there's a trend of changing from multiple point of view to single? Because you mentioned you are writing now a single point of view, or is it just workout driven?
In a way, I mean, I think that it's not a coincidence that the leading edge of the fantasy market the last few years has been urban. And urban fantasy right now tends to be more streamlined in terms of its number of plots, more streamlined in terms of the number of point of view characters. It tends towards first-person point of view instead of third-person point of view. And I think to a certain degree, you're going to see spillover from those trends into epic.
I think you already have.
Yeah. So yeah, I do think that that's the case, but I'd be interested in knowing what others on the panel have.
Well, I gotta say, I just turned in my second book to my agent. And the first one was a sprawling epic fantasy with about 4 or 5 different viewpoint characters. And the second one, I deliberately said, look, if this first book doesn't sell, I want to have a second book ready for him to take and shop around. And I said, this one's going to be a first-person narrative. And I could not make it, as hard as I tried, I could not make it anywhere near as long as that first novel.
Sure.
Because I had to end it. I didn't feel like I wanted to pad it, you know. And I wanted to see what's going to be the different, what am I going to learn from doing a first-person novel instead of a 4 or 5 different viewpoint novel. And in some ways I liked it better, but overall I didn't like it as much because my drive to explore all different aspects of that world wasn't satisfied. And yet, like you mentioned, David, it was a tighter story. It's a tighter, leaner, meaner story. And it's got that one viewpoint. And I think we may actually see that. I mean, that's one way to get your novels leaner and meaner, is to just limit the number of viewpoints. But it's kind of sad in a way, and in another way, it's really beside the point, because a good story is a good story, right?
Yeah.
No matter who's...
Even if you're telling it in 14 lines.
So,
I was
yes.
going to ask if it is useful to make some distinction between epic and high fantasy, those two terms, and to ask where how would you classify something like Mervyn Peake's Gormenghast books?
As literary works. No, I mean, they have more to do with Marquez than they do with Tolkien or anything in the field. The fact they happen to be published as a trilogy by Tolkien's publisher and with a deceptively similar cover treatment is really beside the point. They have nothing to do with, hell, they have more to do with Jane Austen.
So you came out, David, in the 90s when we had a couple of big rock stars basically in the epic fantasy field, like Robert Jordan has put out a few books. Do you think the market now is leaning less away, more away from that because there aren't quite so many like really big names that people outside the genre would want to read?
Boy, I don't know. I think we still have our rock stars. I mean, it's not, you know, it's George Martin instead of Robert Jordan. It's you know, I'm blanking on names, so maybe there aren't as many rock stars. But
Well, I don't think there ever were. I mean, there was basically one Robert Jordan, which was bigger than Catherine Kurtz. It did take an earlier iteration of something similar. No, I don't think there's that much difference in that sense. I mean, it's not like you have a medical show on TV that is very successful and you have a noticeable rise of admissions to medical, applications to medical school. You have a successful lawyer show and you have an increase in admissions to law schools. This is true. I don't think it's really that.
So I've heard that it's harder to sell epic fantasy now than in the past, and do you think that's true? If it's true, what do you do about it if you want to write epic fantasy? What do you think about, beginners selling epic fantasies right now and how difficult it is or isn't?
I actually asked my agent about this the other night when we had dinner because I was preparing for this panel, and she said that she's convinced that that epic is doing better now than it was 5 years ago, and that it continues to be a viable market for aspiring writers and established professionals alike.
Killing the panel, and rightly so.
All right, I think